Hi, everyone. Welcome to Censored News, a Dr. Deep State perspective. We are going to put together some stories around the world, look at some patterns and developments, and get a sense of where the world is going. So, based on this channel thus far, my book, Seeing Through the Singularity, and the forthcoming book, In Pursuit of the Metaverse, I have a thesis that I'm working through as we're looking at the headlines. And that thesis is the world is moving toward a recreation of the Tower of Babel. The original Tower of Babel was about um, building a tower to the heavens, but it was especially about the integration and the singularity of the mind and of speech. And so this is a reiteration of that. And what I am arguing is I'm going to use the word egregore. It's a type of second reality that we're moving into. And a big piece of this second reality requires a notion that we're living, we think in a type of truth, but we have rejected a piece of that. So hold on to the end. That's where I really want us to get to. That's kind of the edgy part of this whole presentation today. So a lot of the stuff is kind of dark, from stories about migrants to stories about eating bugs. And we'll get back to Pope Francis. But the piece that pulls this all together is the enmity between the civilization that has been constructed and the civilization that wants to replace it. And if we don't identify that enmity, we will actually be participating in our own demise, I will argue. So I've had somebody made a comment, what are you going to do when they come for you? And this is what I do. I believe that we are living in an age of mass deception. According to the Dewey-Rheims version of the Bible, there's an operation of error because people do not love the truth. And that includes people of all persuasions. So fundamentally, what my argument is, we have to learn to identify and then love the truth. And most of the world will be in opposition to what we're saying. Most of the world has learned, been memetically and biopolitically trained to hate the truth. So my little contribution to this whole thing is to present it and say why it fits typologically with the story of where the world is going. So I'll argue that we're living in an age of full spectrum dominance. What that means, I could probably take a story from any part of the world and it will interconnect with this, what's going on generally in the world. Borrowing from Macau here, I wanted to get a few pictures from this page. America this week's been deluged by trains and trains and trains of people coming into the country. As this is going on, I'm talking about trains, and these look like they'd be entering the city of Bombay, like aerial shots with just thousands of people on top, train after train after train. And while this is going on, I guess our president here feels that people aren't coming in fast enough. So he ordered the patrol to cut the barbed wire fences holding back the masses. This is the age we're living in. The very notion of a country, by definition, has a border, language, and culture. So people could ask me, why this polyglot? Why the different languages? What's this about? It almost makes no sense if I said the goal was to find one type of unity of mind and spirit to recreate the Tower of Babel. And I think this could be best exemplified by the actions of a famous New York developer in mid-20th century named Robert Moses. And he was famous for doing a lot of public works, various public parks and projects, and particularly the highways that run around Manhattan. So it's kind of a mixed bag of results. But in particular, he was famous for destroying beautiful architecture, beautiful neighborhoods in New York City, and replacing them with modern, hideous architecture. And when one of his critics asked him, what do you make of all this destruction of things that were beautiful and timeless? And he shrugged and said, well, in order to make an omelet, you have to crack a few eggs. And I'm going to suggest that's what's going on in the world en masse. A lot of eggs are being cracked. This unity of mind and spirit that had existed for centuries is being destroyed in order to create a egregore of a reality to replace the reality that was introduced by Western civilization. That process began, I would argue, with the Renaissance, a good 500 years ago, and the introduction of Kabbalistic humanism. And it's reaching its full flowering today. And the rate of change is accelerating day by day by a day. We can see the eggs being cracked, everything that was beautiful, everything that was eternally understood, truth claims that connected both the temporal and the metaphysical are being destroyed en masse. So returning to this, yes, Biden cutting the borders, the fences, and I will submit to you there is a uniparty at play here. When President Trump was in power, I have observed this both from border security. I live down here and looking into this. In my opinion, that border could have been secured within months for pennies on the dollar. Got a major boondoggle hole that just kind of went into the economy and out to really produce nothing. So we have an invasion. Over 8,000 illegals crossed into a Texas city with less than 30,000. This deluge of people, and examples of this we can see around the world. We'll get to one in just a moment. Here we see a story of military Chinese age men with similar clothing, hairstyles, and tattoos. They're being shipped to South America and entering our country. Just like the United Kingdom, just like Europe, just like the Anglosphere generally, this stuff is not happening organically. These people are being activated and targeted, and it's dark stuff. It really is dark stuff. And even Elon Musk, who I believe we could see here, bear in mind when we talk about Elon here. There he is with a Mossad agent. We'll get to this at the end of the video about the power structure, both in our country and other countries, in the UN, and the projects being proposed generally. But Elon, even if Elon's controlled opposition, sometimes you got to take what you can get. He goes down to the American border. No other reporter from any major press is really covering this. And he's asking, why do so many American politicians from both political parties care 100 times more about the Ukrainian borders than the US borders? Why? Ukrainians, this is supposed to be this city that's been completely scorched, but yet you can go into the cities and there's elites, females going out and partying at night with Tiffany and Gucci, and the story is not as it appears. There's a blackout in the Western press on this story. We've talked before about racial inversion. Here we have from Texas public school, public sex offenders. And I know these are Texas stories, but the reason I'm putting on some people's radar, if this is happening in Texas, it's probably happening in other states, and it's probably happening in other countries to skew the statistics. In this case, with sex offenders, you can see the component there of race, white, 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 white. And there's the word conspiracy. What other word could we come up with? But I don't think we really have a conspiracy in one sense. Let me explain that. I'll argue that what's happening is taking place right in front of our face, and we are being presented or externalized with the truth. The problem is that most people are in an operation of error because they do not love the truth. In this case, we have thousands of migrants from North Africa have landed on the Italian island of Lampedusa. So more than 10,000 people invaded an island. Again, this isn't happenstance. This is set up with a population of 6,000 people. So this is going to continue. This is going to continue unless people, for whatever reason, decide to start embracing the truth of what is being clearly presented to us, but I will get there in a moment. Here we have Elon Musk. Well, in this case, he's going down to Texas and he's asking the border people what is going on here. And there's just trains and trains and trains of people coming in and saying they've taken over the trains. They're taking over our cities. We're being invaded. And what I'll argue here is I think we're realizing that all of the politicians have become puppets. And I'll say every last one, but I'll get to that in a moment. But our city councils have reached the other side of that, working together. So I'm going to look at the logic of that. But Elon Musk, some kind of proponent of free speech these days, and he's down at the border, curious about what's going on. So why Elon has to be informing people of just how radical this situation is, it's unfortunate, but that's where we're at. A story that only Mexico surpasses Sweden as a non-warring nation with the most bombings. And it wasn't that long ago, Sweden was the safest city in Europe. It was one of the cleanest cities in Europe. And it's pretty much suffering in all categories or all indicators of what one should expect in a decent life, certainly in terms of criminal activity down here. Mexico, if you're not aware, is pretty famously a troublesome spot. And if I just had to throw something in here, I live in the border, 97% Mexican. You have to travel a long way to see some Anglos like ours. But where I live, it's actually not a terrible place. People are fairly nice. The crime is very low. Statistically, it's lower than pretty much any major city. Reynosa is on the other side of the border, just over here. It's one of the most dangerous places in Mexico, one of the most dangerous places on the earth. But you cross and you're over here, I guess, because we still have a thread of a base of law and order and the tradition of respect for law and order that exists here. If you go to El Paso, the southern border, 12 hours away, statistically, it's one of the safest places in America for a major city. But you go across the border to Juarez, and it's one of, again, the most dangerous places on earth. Same people, Mexicans in both situations, but the cultural foundation is different. The people here have largely assimilated, and it's not a bad place to be, honestly. However, the people coming in now are from Central America and highly, I think, programmed for danger. We have a story about the eating bugs. We'll get off the invasion of our countries for a moment. Green climate agenda, a Trojan horse to destroy the food supply. And of course, Bill Gates and BlackRock are buying up all of the real estate in our country for the sake of this total control. The major corporations, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, own pretty much most of the resources on the planet right now. We'll look at what that means, who exactly owns this and what is their agenda, because it's in lockstep with the UN agenda and the World Economic Forum agenda. So we have this perfect merger of the public and private sector. And you can call it fascism, you can call it communism, but under communism, a big part of the totalitarian technique of menticide, control of the mind, was this humiliation of letting you live in a lie, of telling you who rules you, but you live in fear of acknowledging that. And that's what we're getting into. That's what this externalization of the hierarchy that we're being exposed to, and then I'll show you toward the end of this. You're going to own nothing and eat the bugs. It's said so much, at least on some channels. You'd think people are tired of hearing it, but the majority of the population has not quite grasped this yet. They're living in an operation of air. And why bugs? It's because it's degrading, it's humiliating, it's part of it's evil for its own sake. That's what's going on here. It's evil for its own sake. And they're letting you know ahead of time. So that's the externalization. They're letting you know where this is going. So you're completely metaphysically accountable for what's happening. Fascinating. Obviously, it's one of the most corrupt spaces on the planet right now is Ukraine. So part of this, simply put, what's up with that? The funding from the United States that's going to the Ukrainian war effort is in fact, by and large, being funneled into the UN sustainable development goals and climate activism. So what's really at play here is clearing out this real estate for, I believe, the religious piece of the larger UN piece of the new order of things. This revelation, in a sense, of new evidence just surfaced linking Dr. Fauci directly with the deep state. Of course, I talk about the deep state, but what I'm going to argue here in a moment is that's not enough. That in order for us to deal with what's going on right now, we have to be a little bit more direct than these sorts of terms. But yes, no surprise that the alphabet agencies were involved with this whole coordinated project. And I said the CIA and these intelligence agencies, they're interlinked to the international intelligence system. So this is all one big system going on. And I don't think using terms like the deep state is helpful any longer. So it's very much a complete system. The largest Christian denomination here, the Catholic Church, the human element has taken control, at least of the chair of Peter. Pope Francis again meets pro-LGBTN James Martin days before the start of the Synod of Synodality. The Synodality it's very much a process, a dialogue, which is in contradistinction between the Catholic faith, which should be one revelation made for all time. People can argue about this, but it seems to be the construction of a new church, a different church, a break with the church. But it's not going to happen all at once. It's more or less a continuation of Vatican II, and it's working in lockstep with the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which include gender equity and massive redistribution of the resources of the global north into the global south at the tune of trillions of dollars a year. So these are a lot of eggs being cracked here, very serious stuff. And I think the schism going on in the church is a microcosm of the schism going on in the world, at least in terms of individuals' ability to see the operation of air at work here. Okay, I want to set two things up about the final clip, what I'm kind of building toward today. One is has to do with city halls and the voice of the localities around the world, and the other one is the externalization of the hierarchy. So there was somebody way ahead of their time, and I had the pleasure of meeting Nikki Rapana. She is an Alaskan, and I was up there. I was a professor at University of Alaska 9 years ago, and I got to meet her. And she was a trailblazer, talking about Agenda 21. And she had figured out how between what's going on at the United Nations end and local politics, these groups have captivated both ends of this around the world, city halls, and how to go in there and put agents in place and shape the discourse. And you're going to see that going on in this video. And it's very much shapes the 15-minute city projects that are taking shape around the world. So she was way ahead with all this information. Somebody else came and took 95% of what she was saying, that truth that she was saying. She got promoted. She was from California. I think her name's Rosie. Oh my goodness. It just dropped out of my head. She's a lesbian and Jewish. She passed away a couple years ago. Rosie Corey, I believe. And she had a lot of great information, and people promoted her, and 'cause it seemed to be the best stuff. But when she stole this stuff, or the agent stole this stuff from Nikki, one of the things that was left out is this amazing discovery. And Nikki's just a regular woman private researcher. Her and her daughter, from the ground up, they were living in Seattle, Washington, and they went to these city halls and they looked at how they were trying to shape the urban development at that time. And they researched and researched and researched. And what pulled all this together, what she discovered, was around the world at both the local and the international level, there was a joint merger. And ultimately, what the project was to transfer the common law tradition into Talmudic law. And that was very powerful. So that was left out of the conversation. And that's a critical part of understanding the new world order that we're moving into, the Antichrist system that we're moving into. The other piece of this has to do with the externalization of the hierarchy. And that can be sort of a mystical idea that they tell us what they're going to do before they do it, and these kind of ideas. But at a simple level, back in the day, maybe the agents of change would be Freemasons. Now you can talk about Freemasons all you want. It might have been the Anglo-Americans. You can talk about that all you want. And I don't think it'll wrap. So there's a whole world of truthers out there that are going to use words like it's the Atlanteans, it's the Anglos, it's Catherine Austin Fitts will say it, Mr. Global, or Alex Jones will call it the globalists. This is quintessentially what a limited hangout is. And limited hangouts, I will argue, create egregores, second realities, because it's not the totality of truth. And that metaphysically is what creates these second realities. And we can't defend what's coming at us through the guise of a second reality. So simply put, this person, I believe it's called Marathon. It's a city council. I think it's in Wisconsin. He sounds like he has maybe a Texas accent, but it could be a local city council anywhere. And notice the body language. Notice what happens when he's presented with when the human consciousness is just presented with these indisputable facts and how people react. So I'm going to play this for you.
Livelihood in your day-to-day to put in energy and effort to stand up for what's right. So God bless you. I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about things that people may not know. I think a lot of people are well aware that COVID is a scam. Well, the whole practice of it. Everyone understands there's disease, but the fear that they've pushed is to such a great extent to try to control and manipulate us. So I'm going to talk about who's actually behind it, because not too many people want to do that. We always talk about Republicans, Democrats, but they're both wings of the same bird, unfortunately. So the COVID agenda, who was in charge of the CDC that was controlling and telling our government to shut down small businesses and what they recommend for the mandates of the vaccines and Pfizer and all this? So at the time when COVID was being enacted, I'm going to read off the staff of who was in charge of this CDC. The director of the CDC was Rochelle Walensky, dual citizenship with Israel. She's a Jew. Deputy director of the CDC, Ann Shawalchik, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. CDC chief of staff, Sherry Berger, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. CDC Chief Medical Officer, Mitchell Wolf, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew.
Chris,
CDC Director of the
Chris,
Washington office.
I'm going to ask that
This is
you.
pertinent to the topic. We're
This
talking
is-
about COVID, right?
Freedom of speech. Let 'em
Yeah,
speak.
this is pertinent to COVID. So
Just because
I love you,
he's Jewish
Jennifer.
doesn't make it bad. Let him speak.
Yeah, please. So, Director of the CDC of the Washington office, Jeff Rezek, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. COVID czar, Jeff Zaitz, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. COVID senior advisor, Andy Slavitt, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. Assistant of Health Secretary for
This
Human
is out of
Services for
order.
our country, the Assistant of Health Secretary, Rachel Levine, transgender,
Perner,
dual
can you
citizenship
speak,
with
please?
Israel,
Yes.
I'm
Jew.
going to ask that you hold off, Christopher.
Ma'am, I'm almost done.
Mr.
Head of
Mr.
Pfizer.
Wood, the chair has ruled that your comments are out of order. She's asked you to stop.
How is it out of order?
The chair
How is it out
has.
of order? He said Jew. There's nothing wrong with Jew. It's not derogatory. Yeah,
Exactly.
If you say Catholic or Protestant.
Okay,
how is
keep
that
on going.
The-
Head of Pfizer vaccines,
Again, the
Albert
chair has-
Bourla, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. Pfizer chief scientist, Michael Dostin,
We need
dual citizenship
decorum
with
here.
Israel, Jew. Moderna chief scientist, Tal Zaks, dual citizenship with Israel,
Christopher,
Jew. BlackRock,
please.
everyone know BlackRock? BlackRock CEO, Larry Fink, dual
Please,
citizenship with Israel, Jew.
Christopher.
I said we're willing to sacrifice our ego, our reputation,
You have
and
19
our lives.
seconds.
Yes, ma'am, and I love you, and I appreciate your patience. BlackRock president, Rob Capital, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. The CDC chief medical officer of Johnson & Johnson, Joanne Waldstreicher, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. Chief medical
You
officer
are
of
done.
Merck, Michael Rosenwald, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. Head advisor of the World Economic Forum, Yuval Harari, dual citizenship with Israel, Jew. And that's only talking about COVID. That's not talking about who's in charge of our
Christopher, you
government.
need to
That's not
stop.
talking about who's in control of the media or the banks. I can go on. God bless you all. Thank you for your patience.
So a lot of that speaks for itself. And I think if that information were presented at city halls all over the Western world, you'd see sort of the same result. And I think there are people that have an openness and they know that they're hearing the truth, but they just don't know what to do with it because they're living in a world of full spectrum dominance. They don't know what to do with this information. And I'm going to keep this short. Until we can see and embrace the fullness of this truth, we can't defend our faith as Christians, particularly as Catholics, when we're living in a world of Catholic traditional influencers who purport to preserve the fullness of the tradition. What he's speaking about have been truths that have been accepted for 1900 years. All parts of Catholic dialogue that would buttress what he's saying have been memory hold. And that if we think we're going to get different results, so part of what is very much happening, yes, these people coming in to our country, it's real, but essentially this is metaphysical, or at the very least, it's got a powerful metaphysical component. If we cannot identify the fullness of the truth of the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, if we cannot fully identify the enmity between the church, the mystical body of Christ, and the enemy of the church, we cannot expect any different results. So you're saying, well, I'd rather just play it safe. Fine. There's two questions here. One is your own salvation, if that interests you, and you will be judged on whether you wanted to follow in the direction of Christ and his direction when his entourage was saying, in fear of the Jews, they did not want to go to Jerusalem. But Christ said, that is the centerpiece of my mission. Typologically, that's how from St. Peter to the church fathers, they could understand this was exactly where we would be at one point, perhaps before the Great Tribulation. And these are all components leading up to it. So what's our job? Just to survive it, or to be spiritual warriors and direct the truth? And it's hard when people that call themselves Christians come in and attack you for speaking the truth. The truth is Christ. Christ is the truth. This is consistent with what he did. He went toe to toe and he said, you are of your father, the devil, and you will do the works of the devil, and you will reject my spiritual kingdom, and you will do whatever it takes to realize your earthly kingdom. And that is what's going on. And it's no surprise. It's typological, it's biblical, and it's prophetic. And when people cannot identify that, you will be accountable spiritually, just on my soapbox, but we can't do anything collectively until we recognize the fullness of truth about what's happening to us and what exactly is under attack. It's Christian civilization. It's the mystical body of Christ. And here I will leave us with the words of Dr. Father Dennis Fahey, who has pretty much all of the Catholic hierarchy, and anybody with a job in Catholicism has aggressively used work to memory hole Dr. Fahey, and he really pulls together all of the tradition. And his conclusion is just what that gentleman said right there. And I don't know what his belief system is, but we got to embrace people like that are speaking the truth. We have to love the truth. We have to love the truth. Dr. Dennis Fahey, and I'll leave you with this, would say, whatever the conditions, whatever the seasons, we need to defend the mystical body of Christ without compromise. Full stop. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with that. And I hope everybody's doing well. I'm going to get back to you real soon. This has been Dr. Deep State.